What's up, guys? My name is Rob Epifania. I'm a USPSA Grandmaster, and I'm the owner of Systematic Performance Concepts. Today, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the common issues that you might have when it comes to your shooting in terms of gun movement and how we can solve that issue. Within this video, we're going to use an exercise that's called trigger control at speed. So the idea behind this exercise is that we have a shot timer or a shot dry fire par timer app. That beep is going to be 3 to 4 tenths of a second long. Our goal is to start aimed on target, finger touching the trigger face but not removing any slack. And when that beep goes off, we're going to press the trigger aggressively, quickly to the rear. So the goal is to start aimed on target, press the trigger as quickly as we can. Our goal is to have it done within the beep and to have no movement. So we're here, we're getting very, very minimal movement. In my case, it's a little bit up and to the right. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, what the common issues that we have are and how to solve them. So within this exercise, you can modify a couple things to make it more difficult. Let's say you see zero movement and you are within the time frame. You could do 3 things. 1, you can press the trigger harder. So if we learn how to press the trigger harder in training, when we're under stress, it's less likely that we're going to have a problem pressing the trigger. We can also press the trigger faster. Even though we're within the time frame of the beep, we can still move our finger faster to get a quicker press. Lastly, and I wouldn't recommend doing this very much, I'll explain why in a minute, we can add more distance between our finger and the trigger. So we can start fully prepped to the wall if we want to start. That's going to be the easiest. Touching the trigger face, which is the most common. And then we can start adding distance within our finger. So right now my fingernail is touching the trigger guard. In that case, I'm adding distance to make it more challenging. For people who are home defense oriented, personal protection oriented, you can even start with your finger on the trigger frame and have to get into the trigger frame, into the trigger guard and press the trigger there. So with that said, our intention is to pay very close attention to what happens when we press the trigger during that beep. The whole purpose of the beep is to add a little bit of time pressure into our training so that we're not just doing this very gentle press, right? This adds a little bit of haste to it, which will start to expose issues which we want. If we can't expose issues and overcome those issues at speed, we will never be able to progress in the way that we want to. So let's talk about those issues. Most common problem with a right-handed shooter, and this is all for right-handed shooters. If you're left-handed, it's going to be the opposite. Right-handed shooters' most common problem is pushing to the left, hits to the left. Couple things we can do, couple things that are happening. For one, we could be tensing up our firing hand. So you see from my wrist here, when the fingers are tensing, it moves the gun to the left. Okay. A couple things you could do to try to alleviate that. You can put your brain on your hand and try to say, hey, don't move. That's totally doable. For some people, for me, I find when I really focus there, it actually exacerbates the problem. So for me, I like to actually play around with my grip pressure. So I'd like to tell people actually to tighten their firing hand a little bit, because the whole reason why this happens is people are told to relax their firing hand, but that also makes them feel uncomfortable in the sense that they feel that the gun is gonna move on them. So they get real tense as they're shooting. They go from 10 to 100%, so to speak, for instance. And that ends up happening like this. So I tell people to hold it a little bit tighter and focus pressure towards the bottom 2 fingers here. And that seems to give them less room to tense up. And for some people, that works really well. But largely speaking, it's whatever makes you feel comfortable. So I would play with a little bit looser, a little bit tighter, see what makes you feel that the gun is not going to move on you, and mess around with that, especially in live fire. This is an excellent exercise for live fire too, by the way. So that's one common thing, is the whole hand is pushing. Okay, another thing that might be happening is you might be pressing the trigger in a way that is off on an angle. So if I think of the trigger here, if I'm pressing at an angle, yes, the trigger can only travel straight, but when the trigger finally hits the rearward part of its travel, any excess pressure going into the trigger is going to go into the frame, and that's going to start to disturb the gun. So you can think about that. You might be pushing the trigger in a way that is moving it that way. So what can we do to fix that? Two things. You can add more finger on the trigger, and that's going to help straighten out the path of your finger. Another thing that I found very useful is if you think about taking the fingertip and trying to touch the base joint here. So what that'll do is that'll make the path straighter. It doesn't straighten it out entirely because your fingertip moves in a little bit of an arc, but it'll cause less of this and do more straight. So think about touching the pad here to the base joint here and give that a try. That works really well for a lot of people. Last thing, and this might be a separate video, but when you present the gun out, if your grip is not established here, if you're not clamping the gun early, what happens is when you're pushing the gun out, this clamping action that happens ends up pulling the gun to the left. And you only really see that on the draw, reload presentation, or just pushing the gun out to target. So just be aware of that. If that happens, tell yourself clamp the gun early, meaning put the palm on and apply pressure early, and that's going to solve that problem. So that's left, okay? And a left-handed shooter, it would be to the right, it'd be opposite. Let's talk about, we're seeing the gun move to the right, or shots move to the right. Couple things that could be happening here. Instead of the whole hand tensing, right? The whole hand tensing causes that. If your fingertips tense on the gun only, like if you're pulling your fingertips in, the gun is going to move to the right. So that's a common thing that you might see. That's a different sort of hand tension. This is like the whole hand, and then this is the fingertips are tensing. So that could be a possibility there. Also, going onto the trigger again, if you have too much, you could be hooking the trigger, meaning you're pulling the trigger in a way that is bringing the gun to the right. When it finally breaks the shot and the trigger travel is done, you hit into the frame. Okay, so if we have that problem, it's as simple as putting less finger in the trigger there. Get that little straighter press. I don't specifically tell anybody what particular part of their finger to put on the trigger. It is different for everybody, and it is different for everybody with different guns. So how I might run this 2011 or this double stack 1911 from Gerson would be different than how I'd run their regard. So the trigger, where the trigger sits, the thickness of the grip, how big your hands are, all those things play into this. So I go by what I see when I press the trigger versus it has to be this every time. Two more things that I typically see. Up and to the right is a common one that I see in the beginning, and that comes from the position of the gun in the hand. So if the position of the gun is not in line with the forearm bone here, what's going to happen? So this is very straight of a press, like the gun doesn't move very much. It looks pretty good. But if I take the gun and it's not in that bone supported and it's over, okay, so now you see it's clearly over into this little pocket here. Same trigger press, you can see this move up and to the right. If you see that, it's as simple as taking the gun, adjusting it into your hand a little bit better, and then we eliminate that totally. Now, let's say you have small hands. You can't do that. You have a very big gun, you have small hands, not possible. So we're stuck with something like this. What I would advise you to try is apply pressure into your palm. It's going to be at a little bit of an angle, which isn't ideal, but it helps support the gun, and now you get that straight press again, versus if I don't apply pressure, I just pull straight back, I get that movement. So that's left, right, up, and right. Those are the three common ones that I see. The last one, it's a very interesting one, and it'll be a straight down. Like you'll see the muzzle of the gun tip down a little bit. And what that typically means is that you are pressing the trigger actually at an angle. So you're pressing the trigger down an angle. So what I typically tell people with that, and this has worked really well for them, is bring your finger lower on the trigger face. You can even think about running your finger along the bottom of the trigger guard here. And that seems to solve that problem really quickly for a lot of people. So if you're up too high and you push down, you see that little bit of tick down, bring your finger lower on the trigger face. That should help the trigger be pressed in a way that's very straight and there's no excess pressure being distributed into the frame. So guys, use that exercise. So again, trigger control speed, aim on target, press the trigger, boom. Okay, look at what's happening. In my case, it went straight up. So I'm gonna adjust my grip in the hand and we're gonna solve that, make that a little bit better. Okay, so that's the drill you're gonna do. Another exercise that you could do to add on top of that is to do 6 presses at at once. So we take the gun, we present it out, and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the whole point is to see what's happening. Press the trigger aggressively as you start to see less movement. Try to expose the next issue. And every time you expose the next issue and solve the next issue, you get that much better. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have questions, put them below.